Welcome back, everyone. Today we're going back to the book of Hebrews again with this question right here. How much do we have to do to keep saved? That's quite a question. How much do we have to do to keep saved? You say, well, wait a minute, I believe in eternal security. But then we come to the book of Hebrews, chapter 6, verse 6, and it seems to say, look, you are able to continue to be saved if you hold on to your confidence. What does that mean? That's what we're going to look at it today. But as we're getting into Hebrews 6 here, what we're doing is we're right in the middle of a thought where the writer is comparing Moses and Jesus. Moses was a great guy. Moses was, he was wonderful. God gave him the law to give to the people and all that. But Jesus is better. In the middle of all this, we have this very serious question. We're going to go to Hebrews 6 and verse 6 here. Again, remember, we're in the middle of a thought here. And he says, but Christ as a son over his own house, Moses was great as a servant, but Christ is better as a son over his own house, whose house we are if we hold fast the confidence and the rejoicing of the hope firm to the end. What does that mean? I mean, it seems to be that we are of Christ's house if we hold all the way to the end. In other words, the idea is let's hold on to this thing. If you give it up, I'm sorry, it's all over. You lost your salvation. You've given it up. What does this mean? Now, obviously, I believe in eternal security. Once you're saved, that you always saved if you truly are. So what do we do with a passage like this? And it's really not that difficult to understand once you look at it a little more closely, which is what I want to do just for a few minutes here. First of all, we need to define some words. This word confidence, whose house we are if we hold fast the confidence. What does that word right there mean? That word right there, to break it down, it means the definition in Strong's is an all-out spokenness, frankness, bluntness, or an assurance. In other words, you're holding on to something and you're not hunkering down and hiding it. I mean, you're really holding on to this thing. You have boldness and you have courage. That's the thing you need to hold on to. And the rejoicing also basically means, that word right there, rejoicing, basically means, well, that wasn't supposed to happen. All right, can't double click it in Logos. Rejoicing basically means glorying or boasting in something. So it's kind of the same idea. Both of those words together, that verse indicates that if you are saved, you're not going to be backing up away from it. You're going to be embracing it. You're going to be holding on to it. That doesn't mean that holding on to it is the thing that makes you saved. The idea is that because you're saved, you are holding on to this. You are going all the way to the end. And he helps us as he continues along here. In verses 7 to 11, he's actually quoting from Psalm 95, and he's given us an illustration from history. He says, today, if you will hear his voice, or therefore, as the Holy Spirit says, today, if you will hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion, in the day of trial in the wilderness, where your fathers tested me, tried me, and saw my works 40 years. Therefore, I was angry with that generation and said, they always go astray in their heart. They have not known my ways. So I swore in my wrath, they shall not enter my rest. So what we have here is an illustration from the Old Testament when the Israelites were supposed to go into the promised land and they refused to do it. And they were set aside. And God says, look, I set these people aside because they didn't trust me. They didn't really believe me. They were in it for the things that they wanted, but they didn't really trust me. And so then in verse 12, we're going to return to this in a little bit. Verses 12 and 13, he gives some instructions. It says, beware, brethren, lest there be in any of you, just like the Israelites, an evil heart of unbelief in departing from the living God. But exhort one another daily, well, it's called today, lest any of you be hardened through the deceitfulness of sin. But then he returns to this shocking statement. Look at verse 14. He says again, for we have become partakers of Christ if we hold the beginning of our confidence steadfast to the end. Now, that word confidence is a little bit different meaning, but it has the same idea. We are of Christ's house. We're become partakers of Christ if we hold the confidence all the way until the end. And then, of course, he picks up again with the illustration. Today, if you will hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as in the rebellion. So what we have here is an illustration from the Old Testament people. They did not really believe what God said. That's why they weren't able to enter the rest. And the author of Hebrews is pulling that in. He's saying, look, don't be like that. Don't be like those Israelites who refused to believe God and go into the promised land. But I want to call attention to this phrase right here. For we have become partakers of Christ. For we have become partakers of Christ. Is it saying that we become partakers of Christ by holding the confidence to the end? Or what does it mean? Well, this phrase right here is actually in the perfect tense, which generally indicates something that you've done in the past, but it continues to this day. For example, when I was preaching through this in the church, I used the example of people that became church members. They became members of the church, but because they have become members of the church, they still are. It's not like they're constantly becoming members of the church. It's something they did at one point, but it continues on till today. And that's kind of what this is saying here. Look, you have become partakers of Christ. In other words, you were partakers of Christ, which means you still are if you hold your confidence till the end. In other words, if you stay faithful, it shows that you really, truly were partakers of Christ. You really were part of the family of Christ. It doesn't say, look, you will become partakers of Christ if you hold fast. It says you are partakers of Christ if you hold fast. And here's the main point of this. The persistent boldness and faithfulness toward Christ proves that your salvation, that you are saved. It doesn't make you saved. It proves that you are saved, because for this reason right here, if you really believe something, you will act on it. That's just a pretty much a statement of observation about life. If you really truly believe something, you'll act on it. So the author isn't saying, look, if you do these things, you're going to become partakers of Christ. He says, if you are partakers of Christ, you are going to do it. And that's exactly what the Israelites didn't do. They did not believe God. And he goes right back to that that illustration again in verse 16. For who, having heard, rebelled? He's talking about the Old Testament Israelites. Which ones rebelled? Indeed, was it not all who came out of Egypt led by Moses? I mean, the whole nation refused to go in, except, of course, Joshua and Caleb. But everybody else, they didn't take it. Why? Because they didn't truly believe. Now, with whom was he angry 40 years? Was it not with those who sinned, whose corpses fell in the wilderness? Their dead bodies laid around in the wilderness. Why? Because they didn't believe God. And to whom did he swear that they would not enter his rest? But those who did not obey. They did not obey because they did not believe. So we see that they could not enter in because of unbelief. It wasn't necessarily the refusal to enter the promised land that caused them not to be able to enter. It was the unbelief that causes them to refuse. See, it all goes down to the basis of belief. What do you believe and what do you not believe? If you really believe, you are going to do things. Maybe that's one of the reasons that we get confused, not we, but some people get a little bit confused about work salvation versus not work salvation. It's because the Bible sometimes almost seems to indicate it, but it's not saying that if you work, you would become saved, but it's just a common thought. If you truly believe and you're not just buying into thing, you're trying to have some fire escape from hell, or you kind of like church and like this whole thing, and maybe you go through prayer, you go through baptism or whatever, you're not really into it. Those are people that are going to leave. But if you really, really believe it, you are going to follow and obey, not be perfect, not where suddenly, wow, you don't have any more desire to sin, but there's going to be something to show. You don't just say, okay, I believe it, I assent to it in my head, and then I'm going to walk away and live however I want, but I know I've got this thing because, I had this experience when I was young or whatever. It's not about experience. It is about faith. These people in Israel, sometimes they would kind of believe, right? And they did some things that God said, but then they wouldn't do some things God said. But it seemed like over and over as you read about those early Israelites that they wanted something for themselves. They wanted to turn away from God when they got to the Red Sea. They wanted to turn away when they got hungry or thirsty. But they'll take the food when God gave it to them. They got impatient when Moses went up on the mountain and then they, made this golden calf. Just constantly, they would take something that Jesus said. That God said. They got out of the land of Egypt, right? That was something they wanted. But then when it got hard, they started to turn away. Why? Because they didn't really believe God. Even after they saw him open the Red Sea, later on, they're like, oh, okay, I know that God can open the Red Sea. That's all good. He can destroy the whole Egyptian army, but I'm not so sure that he can feed us. This was a belief problem. It was a faith problem. That's the illustration that the author of Hebrews is pulling in here. It is all about faith. You need to believe. If you don't really, truly believe in God, if you don't really, truly believe in Jesus, then you're not saved. So you have some people, they kind of join up with Christianity for a while, and this thing sounds really good. Maybe they enjoy having a church experience and all this, but something comes in, trials, disappointment, impatience, doubt, something, and they walk away. Now, I'm not saying that a true Christian can't have a period of that, but someone who just walks away from it completely, I don't know their heart, but I have to question if they ever really truly believed, or did they just kind of buy into it because their parents did? We see a lot of deconversion stories with people. Most, it seems like, of the deconversion stories that I've heard were people who have grown up in what we might call a strict, often an independent Baptist um, s- group, and they learn the process, they learn how it's supposed to go, but they never really became their own. And then they rebelled. Often they rebelled because of the teaching about immorality and about homosexuality. And they're like, well, I think that we should be able to do that, so I'm going to discount the whole Bible and throw the whole thing out. But often it's people who grew up knowing what's right, but they never really had it themselves. They knew how to walk the walk, they knew how to talk the talk, but they never really truly believed, and eventually they walk away. So I think this is really kind of sobering, because when you walk away permanently, it shows that most likely, and I know we could always talk about stories, well, what about this? What about that? Well, I really think this person was saved, but generally what we have here is people who never truly bought into this whole thing. And that's why they walked away. So you say, wait a minute, what are you supposed to learn? Go back to our something I skipped over just really quickly. I told you we were coming back to this. Some examples about what we should do. Back in verse 12, he says, beware, brethren, lest there be in any of you an evil heart of unbelief. So this is what we have as an admonishment or some instructions here. Evaluate your own faith. Evaluate your own faith. Beware lest there be in any of you an evil heart of departing from the living God. So be careful about that. Watch out. Evaluate yourself. Are you real? Well, how do you know if you're real? Obviously, to a degree only is it possible to look at your works and say, well, I'm real because, well, I go to church all the time and I don't swear and I've never killed anybody, so I must be real. No, you have to be careful about this. But because you can't just look at yourself and say, oh, I do some good things, so I know I'm saved. That's not the point. The point is, if you're walking away from it and it's not bothering you, that should bother you in itself. You're losing faithfulness because you don't really care. If you were faithful and now you're not, and it doesn't bother you, you have serious reason to be concerned. Because if you really believe this, there's going to be something in you that says, I need to do what's right. I think a Christian, a true Christian who is walking away from God should be the most miserable person in the whole world, because this is because they have this inside them where I just, I need to be faithful to God. What should the Israelites have done? The Israelites, I'm sure they did not realize what God was going to do. How's God going to open the Red Sea? They didn't think about opening the Red Sea. There they were. They're just complaining. We should go back to Egypt and all this. And what are we going to do? They never thought that God's going to open the Red Sea. They never thought he was going to give them quail to eat. They never thought he'd give them water from the rock. They had no idea how God was going to do things. And so they stopped believing. That what they should have done is just trust it anyway. We're just going to go ahead. We're just going to obey God. We have no idea what he does. We're just going to trust in him and not trust in our feelings. Maybe that's a little bit of encouragement for how we're supposed to act. If you feel yourself, kind of doubting and questioning and pulling away a little bit and thinking, I don't know about this whole thing, just do the right thing anyway and see if you can work through that. And over time, you're going to say, wait a minute, as I watch what God can do, I'm going to believe it even more and more. Faith is not a feeling where, I just know that this is right. Faith is an act of trust. I know God has saved me. I know what he's done for me. I'm going to serve him regardless whether or not I understand everything that he's doing. So just do it. Just be faithful. And the second thing that he said there in Hebrews 3:13, he says to encourage each other. Encourage each other. You look around, you don't know who around you is real and who's not real. We don't know. There may be some people that are really, you might think that they're believers, you might think they're Christians, but they're kind of starting to wander away a little bit. And it's not like they're about to lose their salvation, because that's not possible. But they might actually be at a point where they've kind of been along for the ride. They're kind of looking at this thing, and everyone thinks they're a Christian. They've kind of been through the experiences. Maybe they've been baptized, maybe been joined the church or something. But they are really coming to the point where they're questioning, do I really, really believe this? And they might be in that precarious situation. Okay, am I going to stay with this or not? And that is actually the point of their true salvation. They haven't had it in the past, but they're wondering. What we need to do is we need to encourage these people. Hey, stay with it. Just stay faithful. Not that staying faithful is going to cause you to be saved, but we need to encourage them to not allow the temptations of sin to get in their life, because sin will harden these people. We want their hearts to stay soft till eventually they come to the point where they say, you know what, I really truly believe. So do we act with faithfulness and thereby receive our salvation? No. How it really works is we trust, we believe, and because of that, we are now new people and we will actually believe and stay with it. Again, yes, a Christian can walk away a little bit for a while, I think, but I think that to be miserable. But there's going to be some kind of a drawing to come back. Why? Because they believe this. They know it's true. You'll always act on what you actually believe. So if you can walk away and not come back and don't care, and you get to the end of your life, don't think, oh, I remember I was 5 years old. I said this prayer, the preacher baptized me, and I've been a member of that church for, 75 years and I've never been there since, but, I have this thing. No, that's not what it is. True believers will automatically be faithful to some kind of extent. So evaluate yourself. Am I real? Do I really believe this? Am I serving God faithfully? If not, go out and start serving him faithfully. If it bothers you, that's actually a good sign. If you don't serve him and it doesn't bother you, that's a bad sign. All right, so that's a few thoughts on Hebrews. Share in the comments if you have any opinions on it. I'll see you next time, and God bless.